I get a lot of comments on my videos from people who clearly don't understand undue influence. Maybe that's because they haven't done the research on it, or maybe it's because they just haven't been exposed to the learning materials. So partly to avoid having to explain it every single time, and partly because this information is just so important, I'm going to do my best at unpacking it in a video and talking about undue influence, the bite model, and how all of that applies to cults. Before we get started, I just want to be clear once again that I'm not an expert on any of this. I'm not trained or qualified in any way, so please do your own research. I'm going to include links to everything that I've mentioned below in the description, so if there's anything that you need to read, please read it. Don't just take my word for it. All I'm doing is compiling this information and condensing it into a video that's somewhat more bite-sized than numerous articles and websites and books and all the rest of it. My intention is that this video provides a basic overview of what undue influence is and how it applies to cults generally. I'm going to use a number of examples from different cults to help illustrate my point. Please note that if I don't mention your cult here, that doesn't mean that it's not a cult. The important thing here is to evaluate this information and see how it applies to the various groups and leaders in the world, so that we can decide whether or not their advice is safe to take and whether or not they deserve our loyalty or admiration. So, what is undue influence? Undue influence is actually a legal term which applies to when a person in a position of power, for one or a number of reasons, uses their position to encourage a weaker or less powerful person to make decisions which may not be best for them in the long run. This often includes taking advantage of the weaker person. So it's worth exploring power a little bit here, because undue influence does go further than religious or spiritual cults. It's easy to imagine how the term power could apply to someone who has a lot of wealth or influence in a business or corporate way, in that domain, has a seat on a board and so on. But how does this translate over to a religious or spiritual setting? Often when you're learning about different cults, you start to notice some patterns. One such pattern is the claim to have some connection to a god or gods, or to have some special higher knowledge that nobody else has. The ways that this is done can be covert or overt, but ultimately the effect is the same as far as I've seen. Really, it comes down to the leader being special in some way, and that specialness grants them a degree of social power. The governing body of the Watchtower, who are in charge of Jehovah's Witnesses, claim to be anointed, or a channel of God on earth. Others claim to have some special connection with God, or some special abilities which give them the authority to speak on certain things and do certain things. I'm sure we can all think of a number of examples of this, some of which I've already made some videos about. One that always springs to mind is Bentinho Massaro's "I'm so much freer than everybody else." Some spiritual or religious leaders claim to be reincarnations of various historical or religious figures, from Shirdi Sai Baba to Da Vinci and Imhotep, from the two witnesses in the Book of Revelation to Jesus himself. The claims are endless, and the assertions unverifiable. Others still claim to be no one at all and just a conduit for truth. Whatever the case, if someone positions themselves as special in a way that's unattainable to the average person, or they claim to have knowledge which is unattainable to the average person, then they are putting themselves in a position of social power. The caveat is that people have to believe them, and that's a good thing, because that means that these groups are relatively small when we compare them to the larger religions in the world. But this is where the other areas of influence come in when we're talking about small groups getting bigger. So according to Stephen Hassan, who's the guy that put the bite model together, and we'll get onto the bite model in a minute, influence exists on a continuum. There's healthy forms of influence and unhealthy forms of influence. This graphic is from Hassan's website. Just one look at it gives you a pretty comprehensive view of the difference between healthy and unhealthy influence. Let's just have a look at a few of these points here, and then we'll move on. So if we're looking at members of a group and we find that a person's personality has changed since joining a group, their personality has changed in a way that is more appropriate to the new setting that they're in, it's more similar to the people that they're around, that's a red flag. Another one is dependence and obedience, and I've seen this one enforced in a number of different ways, both covert and overt, using fear strategies, gaslighting, so on and so forth. When a group is expected to be dependent on the leader, or when a group becomes dependent on the leader, and when obedience is expected without question, then there's trouble afoot. So that's all for members of a group, but if we're looking at a leader, then we're looking for signs of whether they're mentally, psychologically healthy, or whether they are narcissistic or sociopathic. If you're not familiar with the narcissistic traits, then I've got a list here from the Mayo Clinic. Signs and symptoms of narcissistic personality disorder and the severity of symptoms may vary. People with the disorder can have an exaggerated sense of self-importance, have a sense of entitlement and require constant, excessive admiration, expect to be recognised as superior even without achievements that warrant it, exaggerate achievements and talents, be preoccupied with fantasies about success, power, brilliance, beauty or the perfect mate, believe that they are superior and can only associate with equally special people, monopolise conversations and belittle or look down on people they perceive as inferior, expect special favours and unquestioning compliance with their expectations, take advantage of others to get what they want, have an inability or unwillingness to recognise the needs and feelings of others, be envious of others and believe others envy them, behave in an arrogant or haughty manner, coming across as conceited, boastful and pretentious, insist on having the best of everything, for instance the best car or office. At the same time, people with narcissistic personality disorder have trouble handling anything they perceive as criticism, and they can become impatient or angry when they don't receive special treatment, have significant interpersonal problems and feel easily slighted, react with rage or contempt and try to belittle the person to make themselves appear superior, have difficulty regulating emotions and behaviour, experience major problems dealing with stress and adapting to change, feel depressed and moody because they fall short of perfection, have secret feelings of insecurity, shame, vulnerability and humiliation. If a leader exhibits even a few of these, then there's cause for concern. If they exhibit a lot of these publicly, then it's likely that they're an unsafe leader, and unsafe leaders don't deserve to be followed. So that's one point on what makes a leader unsafe, and I think that it's a pretty big red flag if anyone, whether a leader or someone in your personal life, is exhibiting those symptoms, and there's things that can and should be done to help protect against that. But when we're looking at groups and relationships, we need to look at the power structure. The power structure is key. Are we looking at an authoritarian power structure, and are there checks and balances in place? If there aren't checks and balances in place which protect against abuses of power, then that's a red flag. If there's no system in place to lodge complaints about potential ethical concerns that members or non-members may have regarding the group's conduct, that's troubling. And if there's no way to hold an organisation accountable, then that's a concern. That's another red flag. Jehovah's Witnesses have been disfellowshipped and shunned by their entire families for asking too many questions, and this isn't uncommon with cults. Disagreeing can get you branded as a hater, and speaking out, even if you're just presenting facts, even if you're just presenting evidence, can lead to venomous attacks and even threats. And that's something which I think it paints a pretty telling picture about the realities of these groups. As a side note, if a group really is privy to eternal secrets of the universe, ultimate truth in some way, why are they so concerned with hounding dissenters? The truth is the truth, right? If an idea can stand up to scrutiny, then it will. And if it can't, and if it can be dismantled by logic, then I think it deserves to be. As I say, this is telling, it says a lot, and it gives the rest of us plenty to think about. So there are a lot of reasons that someone might end up in a cult, but one thing to take note of is that for the people inside the group, for the leader, and for the members of the group, typically there's no good reason to leave. And you can throw up all the evidence, all the facts, all the logical, rational arguments you want, and it won't make a dent in their faith. So that's a basic overview of the influence continuum. For now, let's look at the bite model though, and how that applies to unsafe groups and leaders and cults in general. On the website, this is how the bite model is described. Based on research and theory by Robert J. Lifton, Margaret Singer, Edgar Schein, Louis Jolyon West and others who studied brainwashing in Maoist China, as well as cognitive dissonance theory by Leon Festinger, Stephen Hassan developed the bite model to describe the specific methods that cults use to recruit and maintain control over people. BITE stands for behavior, information, thought and emotional control. What the bite model enables us to do is evaluate a group or a leader. It gives us a framework for determining whether a group or a leader is safe or unsafe. One note on the bite model though is that not all the boxes have to be ticked. If a group or a leader fulfills enough of the criteria on the bite model in a severe enough way, we can call it a cult. I've included a link to the bite model and other related information below in the description, and it's possible that I'll do a video more in depth on the bite model in the future. One of the reasons I wanted to make this video was because I keep getting this same comment basically over and over and over again, and I thought it was worth addressing it. The comment is basically, it was your choice to follow someone. And when I hear that, I think the person saying that clearly doesn't understand undue influence. They clearly haven't done the research necessary and perhaps don't understand how cults work at all. Especially nowadays with the internet and the increasing prevalence of online cults, there's a lot more to it than people realise. Really, when we're talking about undue influence, what it comes down to is this. The mind of a person under undue influence isn't entirely their own. In many cases, they've been manipulated, lied to and tricked into giving their autonomy up to an unsafe leader who won't respect it. If a person is to make decisions for themselves, they need to have a secure handhold on reality, and empty promises made from a pedestal take that away. If a person is to recognize any degree of truth, they need to have their faculties about them. And misrepresented ideas, misrepresented facts, gaslighting and loaded words inhibits those. As far as I'm concerned, a person under undue influence is missing from themselves in some way. Their identity, their personality has been hijacked and supplanted by an imposter who's ready to redecorate their entire life in cult colours. And while I'm an atheist now, I do believe that if a supernatural claim can be proven, then it should be. And if a person believes themselves to be a cut above the rest, they need to be able to demonstrate that. They should do it safely without hurting anyone, but they should demonstrate that. But if any reasonable person is going to take them seriously, then they need to be able to demonstrate that outside of the confines of undue influence, outside of a cult setting. Only then can we determine whether they're the real deal or just another charlatan who's going to lie and take everybody's money and then change their name and disappear into the sunset. Speaking as someone who has been under undue influence, I can say that while under undue influence, the world looked and felt different for me. Everything that I experienced went through the filter of the leader I was following, their teachings, their ideas, their encouraged way to see the world, to deal with the world. The cognitive dissonance is very real, both inside and out of a cult situation. For example, the Jehovah's Witnesses don't see the world outside of their kingdom halls and their religion and their specifically controlled confines and see happiness and contentment and genuine connection. They only see depression without the truth, apathy without their version of God. Anything else that contrasts that, they just don't see it. In just about any cult, the warped veneer of perception instilled by the leader is pervasive. It will turn critics into haters for little more than a question, and it will turn someone looking in earnest for answers into a mentally diseased person fooled by Satan for believing apostate lies. And so the way out is a difficult one, and for anybody questioning their leaders and beginning to realize that maybe they've been lied to, it's not nice. It's not nice for anyone. So to that end, I would encourage anyone who feels the need to jump down the throat of someone who's in a cult or someone under undue influence to kind of stop like a minute and take a breath and then respond with a little bit more consideration. Obviously, there's going to be cult members who are intent on nastiness and being horrible to you for being different or asking questions or pointing out things with evidence and facts. But, you know, I mean, I'm not in a position to tell anyone what to do, so obviously do whatever you think is right. But like, when I'm dealing with people like that, and I see that the conversation is gonna go nowhere, I might have a little bit of fun, and then I'll just get out of Dodge as quick as possible. But yeah, I mean, deal with that one as you see fit. I'm not gonna sit here and give advice nobody asked for. But when it comes to people questioning, when it comes to people genuinely looking for answers, and when it comes to people who are unsure whether or not they're gonna feel safe outside of the controlled confines of their cult, I would encourage compassion. I'd encourage empathy, because undue influence is a beast and a half, and nobody should have to go through that. Anyway, I hope that that covers the basics of undue influence and the influence continuum, the bite model, and all of that stuff pretty well, pretty clearly. As I say, there's a lot more to all of it, so as I've mentioned, there's links to everything below in the description. Please familiarise yourself with the influence continuum, the bite model, undue influence in general, Stephen Hassan's work, Robert J. Lifton's work, and so on. It's fascinating stuff from an educational point of view, but I feel that it's like really, really important in this day and age for all of us to be educated in some degree on it, to some degree on it. Because, as I've said so many times before, if you don't know how undue influence works, how can you know if you're under it? If you don't know how cults work, how can you know if you're in one? So, that said, if you got something from anything that I've shared today, then please hit the like button, and if you want to see more from me in this kind of video, then please subscribe to the channel and don't forget to hit the bell. If you want to get in touch with me personally, as usual, all my links to my social media are in the description below, along with my Patreon. If you think what I'm doing is important and you want to support the channel, then please consider becoming a patron. Even $2 helps. And I've set up a bunch of little perks on there to say thank you to anybody who does become a patron. While we're on Patreon, I want to say a massive thank you to my first patron, Manau. Manau, you're a star. Thank you for being a patron and supporting the channel and helping me do this kind of thing. And on that note, I want to say a massive thank you to you for watching this, and I will see you in the next one.